Overcoming racism, discrimination, and prejudice. How do we heal the hate? Next on Living Smart. Hello, I'm Patricia Gras. Welcome to Living Smart. This is a new series about getting the most out of life. Today's guest, Steinwender, shares with us how to heal racism and why it takes away our humanity and sense of connection with others. Have pen and paper ready. We'll have a list of resources after the show. In 1989, Cherry Steinwender founded the Center for the Healing of Racism with a group of friends.
One of the things that we never did was stop and really talk about racism in any meaningful way. We wanted other people to have the opportunity to go through a process that's honest, that's real, that's safe, that's loving, to be able to come out educated as well as empowered.
They came from different ethnic backgrounds, and their conversations on race became the catalyst for the only organization in the country to help people heal from racism.
And it shows me over and over again what can happen when ordinary people band together with a total social agenda and how we can change this world. Before you create the laws of all of these institutions that people use to access services, you must first of all come up with some of the institutions in our society.
For the past 16 years, Cherry Steinwender has traveled around the country teaching dialogue racism. St. Agnes Academy was the only school in the country to make it a semester class 10 years ago. Diane Turney has taught this class for several years and seen remarkable results in her students.
Our job is to provide an opportunity for our students to become better people. I mean, our whole purpose is to educate students so that they're prepared. Our minds naturally categorize. It is just a natural function of the mind. Healing Racism is a class that gives them the opportunity to have their consciousness raised, to recognize how this issue has so wounded and divided this country, and to provide them hope.
The green people would have to have representatives.
They can't represent themselves.
The goal in the classroom is to create a safe space for students to open up and share their true feelings about race. One way is to watch films and talk about them. The other is using hypothetical examples. In this scenario, the minorities are green people.
I give them complete power to create the laws. And so that's an awesome task, to have all this power. And so now they had to create the laws that will govern the lives of green people, because all too often racism is power plus prejudice. So the prejudice that I chose for the green people is that they smell bad.
For Diana Turney, the exercise is essential to raise consciousness, especially among teenagers.
Their first reaction is to deny that racism exists. They say it's not a problem anymore, they're too uptight, they're too sensitive. So we don't know how to talk about it.
At the beginning of the semester, most students told us they wanted to learn how to stop prejudice and learn to deal with their own misconceptions of others.
We just don't interact with, people of our same species. It's not, we don't get the full effect of being human if we exclude ourselves from other people that are human themselves.
If you're green, you have to wear special gloves.
By the end of the semester, the students confronted some issues that helped them grow.
Some of the time I felt really frustrated. Learning about white privilege, I kind of felt a sense of empowerment, but it was more like a shameful empowerment because I felt really bad that I didn't do anything to get this kind of privilege. My view on things are a lot different, and it's for the better, I think.
To sometimes see the opinions that my other classmates had to this institution of affirmative action, it did shock me to think that, most people were saying that they didn't oppress anyone, which is true, but it's the concept of you have to look in the past and to see the actions that were done in the past, how they affected us now.
Unaware racism is really present in our society, and I've learned ways to bring it to people's attention and to better understand probably not their own fault for thinking the way they do, it's just what they've learned.
And learning by getting the right information, the truth about what happened, Cherry says, is the first step to healing.
They will be able to look back at this class at what they learned and know we are not doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past, and I can make a difference because I am an empowered person.
Teach me.
Teach me.
Teach me.
Teach me.
Teach me.
Not to hate people because I don't know them. Because I don't know them.
Teach me.
Teach me.
Teach me.
Teach me. Teach me.
Thank you, Cherry Steinwender, for joining us.
Thanks.
It's great to have you here on Living Smart. Terry, somehow it's very painful every time I've been to some of your sessions to hear other people talk about racist issues. But I'd like to start with one question, which is, why is someone a racist?
Okay. That's very interesting, Patty, the way that you asked the question, why is someone a racist? Let me rephrase that. And the reason that I want to rephrase it, because part of healing, human beings will never heal if you continue to call them names. However, whenever I enter the arena of educating around racism, I always say, nobody's here to call you a racist. I'm not going to do that. However, we have to talk about it, and we will use a term called racial conditioning. Everybody in this country, and really doesn't matter how white you are or shades of brown, have been infected and affected around racism. And one of the reasons that I feel that it stays into place, there's a lot of fear. As Martin Luther King said in the quote that you used, we fear each other and we hate each other because we don't know each other, and partly because we have been totally separated from each other, even though some may disagree with that, because I've heard it said all the time. And of course I know, we go to school together, we work together, and all these different ethnic groups together, but that's different from totally knowing another human being in the shoes that they walk in. Racism has been around because we have refused to really talk about it in a very meaningful way.
Heart to heart. One of the most interesting identifications when I went to dialogue was unaware racism. Tell me about that, and give me an example of it.
It's interesting because the student was talking about unaware racism in the piece that was just played. Unaware racism is something what good people do and say all the time that keep racism in motion. And it is so unaware till the individual themselves do not even know what they're saying is very racist. And I think one of the most, the best example right now is in Beaumont, Texas. And for the last 16 years, I've followed this story of a street called Jap Road. And the Japanese Americans were very clear and were saying to the people of Beaumont, Texas, that sign offended them. But you see, the citizens of Beaumont were so unaware that they didn't even see that it was racist. But over and over again, they would say, oh, it's not racist. We are using this road sign to honor Japanese American people. But the people are saying the sign offends us. It took 16 years of my following the story for that sign to be taken down this year.
To finally hear
So
it.
you see, and to see how unaware that it is. And it's good people doing and saying things all the time that keep this thing in motion because they're so unaware.
Okay. You use the word not stop racism. Mm-hmm. You use the word heal racism. Why healing? Why use the word healing?
Yes. Oh, Patty, I think it is so necessary to heal. We have people dealing with healing the trauma from post-traumatic stress due to wars. Right. We have people that's being in, sessions to heal from, battered abuse syndrome, all sorts of things. And I think that racism itself and the effects it has had on human beings have created a type of trauma that we really need to be able to heal from, and we will never do it unless we can come together in a space that's totally supportive, that's honest, where we can totally reflect on the things that have happened to us to bring them to consciousness, because sometimes we bury this trauma within ourselves, and as a result, we're on a job or we're in schools, talking and interacting with people from all these different ethnic groups, and we will never know what that one button is that will get pushed, that will cause us to explode. We need to begin to heal.
And the healing is mostly emotional.
Oh,
heart,
yes, from the emotional
as opposed
trauma.
to intellectual healing.
Oh, yes.
As a nation, we've spent, talking about intellectual healing, we've spent millions of hours discussing racism, having TV shows, having books written. Why is it that we're still struggling with something like this? Are we not dealing with it the way we should?
You know, that's a very interesting, comment and observation as well. Yes, there was the Kernel report. Just here within, probably about the last 6 years,
Explain the Kernel report first.
Where, the study of all of the situations in the lives.
The race relations in America.
In America. And in 1997, the Race Relation Task Force was put into existence to study race relationships, which they did, and the report went to the Congress and the then president at the time. So we've been studying this thing for a long time. Talk shows have really talked about it, and you have all of these people, but I think there is something missing. The ingredient to sit down with people quietly, away from the cameras, to be able to give people the opportunity to say, this happened to me, and to not so much have it validated, but at least to be able to listen to it. There is a way of healing. There's a way of bringing human beings together to be able to look at this ugliness in order to get them to connect to their common humanity. And I really love the work of this organization because it's to empower people through education and healing of racism. So I want to keep that word healing on the forefront.
How do you do that, though? I mean, you provide a safe space. What if some people don't want to attend dialogue? Let's say they're afraid to meet with other people, to be in a situation like that. How can they start making a difference in their lives on their own? Read books or meet with other people. How do you start a conversation about race without getting defensive or scared that you're going to be judged?
Well, you said something about reading books. We've been reading books, Patty. And I think what happens all too often is that we don't want to really examine a lot of our, emotional commitment to ignorance, so to speak, or to really examine a lot of our customs and habits, where may be, in themselves, racist, sexist, homophobic. We don't want to be honest with ourselves. And until you can be totally honest, until you can strip away those layers and to run naked through the world, so to speak, that this is who I am. I didn't ask for this conditioning, but I got it. And I'm not a bad person. But it's almost like the situation where it said you could tell a lie long enough. And if you repeat it long enough and often enough, people will believe it. People have begun to believe this is who that core essence is, and it isn't.
And that leads to my next question. One of the great terms that you have coined is internalized racism. It's when you begin to believe the stereotypes about you. Yes. Tell me about that and give me an example of it.
Oh, Patty, that for me was something that was an eye-opener, that I've always known there was something there, but I did not have a word, a title, a language, and I didn't have enough information. But it's when people that have been victimized by all of the negative information, and sometimes no information at all, which is just as damaging, when they begin to believe their own inferiority, because we have a whole history in this country of being taught that we are less than. So when you begin to believe this, internalize it, and act it out in the only arena that's safe for us, we act it out on each other. And even though we may use the words like internalized oppression or internalized racism, it's that emotional commitment to ignorance that we really hate ourselves. And what is interesting about that, since as an African American person I'm speaking of this, any targeted group of people, and Latinos acted out big time too. And the example, say within the Latin community, in Venezuela, probably about 3 or 4 years ago, when Miss Venezuela was crowned as Miss Universe, and many people in Venezuela didn't want that dark model to represent that country. And you see, she looked more like me. To the core, we have been conditioned to hate ourselves. And this is something that the type of work we must do for ourselves. We can't depend on nobody else to help us with this. And as we were talking earlier, it's the same scenario why people that come here from Africa that are not labeled, African Americans, how we see them as less than, and that, we are, better than them, and how all of this stuff plays out. It's a ugliness, it's a cancerous, it's a trauma.
Well, and also I've heard even from African Americans themselves that say, well, I'm lighter skinned, so I get treated better. I mean, even within the African community, the African American community, someone with a lighter skin tends to do better. How do you deal with that, though? If you're living that, how do you deal with it?
How I deal with it, Patty, I had to also look at this because I grew up in Louisiana. Louisiana, as many people have said, is that other country. And in Louisiana, because of that history of the French, where in Louisiana, they really bred women to be able to produce the perfect woman. And the perfect woman in Louisiana was light-skinned, with some African features, but not too much. And these women were set up as concubines, as mistresses, and they could also own other darker Africans, you see. This history, the way it played out, taught us the lighter your skin is, the better you are. And I had people and boys in Louisiana when I was a teenager that wouldn't date me, that was light-skinned, because I was too dark. So I grew up with that. I know it firsthand. I know how painful it is, and I know the amount of work that it takes to help free yourself from this, to be able to walk through this world and say, I am good enough, clothed in my shade of darkness.
How do you, though, if you meet someone who's prejudiced or racist or believes in all this, or maybe not even aware of it, how does the transformation begin? What's the first thing you need to do?
The first thing that I need to do is accept them, regardless of where they are, and to know also that they didn't do this to themselves. It was done to them, that they received the same education that I received. And I have to truly believe if I can change, they can too. And that's how I stay totally focused, that if I can change, they can too, if given the opportunity, if given the nurturing, and especially the education, that if I change, they can too.
How relevant is, and we spoke about this, that in the Constitution, Africans were considered 3/5 of humans, right? Do we need to discuss history? Do we need to know, let's say, genocide against the Native Americans, slavery against Americans, discrimination against Mexicans or Asians? Do we need to learn our history to be able to heal? Or do we just, let's forget that? We're being too sensitive. We don't want to talk about the past. We should live the present. How do we deal with it?
When I went to the Holocaust Museum for the first time, as you enter into the building, one of the first panels, it happened, therefore it can happen again. And one of the resilience of Jewish people is to never ever let this world forget of what happened to them. And I feel that is very empowering, to never ever let people know what happened to us in this country. For indigenous people, that's also dealing with healing the hurts of racism and internalized racism, to begin to look at the history, and so people can take comfort in it wasn't something we did to each other so much as something that was done to us. I feel that other, component to looking at all of this is that it was important for Cherry to know that why all of those light-skinned boys in Louisiana wouldn't date me? Because there was a history connected to that. With even in the church structure, the lighter-skinned children got a chance to be the altar boys and help the sisters. The lighter-skinned children got to be the majorettes and on the choir team, all of these other things, but not Cherry. It's important to know that whoever was choosing people to be able to put in leadership positions, if you want to call it leadership positions, they too had an education that taught them to believe in their own self-hatred and how it's played out around skin color.
I've noticed something while traveling. For example, in Brazil, there's a lot more mixing of the races than there are. You tend to see a lot more mixing in underdeveloped countries than you do in developed countries. Do you think that racism is more prevalent in capitalistic societies or developed societies? And if that's the case, why is that?
But I see, the thing of it is, I don't believe that.
Okay.
You see, I do believe it even in Latin countries. There's a large amount of that. They just don't call it. They don't name it.
Or they don't
name it.
They don't confront
because
it.
When you brought up Brazil, because I've had an opportunity to work with people that have come to this country through the State Department from at least 80 different countries. And to be able to have the people with the delegation that came from Brazil praying and just begging me to come to Brazil and to deal with the issue in Brazil. Then here you have Brazil, which is second largest black population, being second only to Nigeria, that this thing is being played out the same way. They just don't name it.
They don't talk about it
They
or
just
name
don't
it.
name it.
What about people who say, I'm not responsible for what my ancestors did, or I'm an immigrant, I don't have anything to do with that? What do you say to them? I mean, I'm not racist. I'm living right here, and that happened in the past in America. It's over. Get over it.
Well, you know, it's interesting because there's a very, very dear friend of mine that's been in my life probably over 30 years. And I helped her raise her 2 boys. And she's European American. And what is interesting, that she would not get close, very close to people of African descent, because she was so afraid that they would find out that her ancestors owned slaves. You see, that's how deep this thing is. We take on collective guilt. You see, I know my friend didn't own slaves, and I will not hold her responsible. I'm too intelligent for that her ancestors owned slaves. I'm too intelligent. And most people wouldn't. But the thing of it is this collective guilt that people are walking around with. And, then the other part of that, too, is that I really feel that I'm not going to hold people responsible for what they did way back then, but I will hold their feet to the fire what they're doing now, because that's what's important. But we need to understand that history. And I don't want people taking on collective guilt, because a lot of times this guilt really doesn't help. It really doesn't. And I think for a lot of European Americans that find themselves in that space of guilt, it's like walking around, oh, Jews, I'm so guilty. And they so absorbed with themselves and their own self-guilt till they will never be able to help anybody else. It's like calling attention to yourself, oh, poor little me, I'm so guilty for what my people did. And no. I don't want you walking around here in that space of guilt. I want you to be empowered so that you can make a difference. And if anything that I say make you uncomfortable, I applaud that, because it's my history. People that's walking around comfortable, they don't have a need to move into the arena of action. I want you in the arena of action where you can make a difference.
How do you know, Cherry, you're living smart?
I really feel with all of my heart that I'm living smart. And I give you 3 examples, Patty. I really feel that any time you have been out in a nonprofit organization that still struggles with money, and when a lot of nonprofit organizations are no longer in existence, you're still around. You have no large budget to be able to go out on a large media campaign, but you still exist, and people are still asking for you. I really feel that I am, on the individual level, living smart, because I get up every single day just wanting to do more. I love what I do. I love to be able to empower people regardless of what age they are and what physical appearance they are clothed in. And so I really feel I'm living smart. And then again, to be able to know who sat around my kitchen table. I'm living smart because I don't just go out and talk about people coming together and internalizing oneness. My whole life is so diverse. And the people that sit around my kitchen table, not the people that just show up to do a workshop with me or, at a school or whatever. The people that sit around my kitchen table is from every corner of the globe. And I embrace and celebrate that every day. And I feel I'm living smart. But there's one thing, too, that I feel that would help a lot of people. And this is something that is long before the Center for the Healing of Racism. Probably about 40 years ago, I came up with this whole thing about that I want young people to really wrap themselves around this. Is to invest your money in your house. Invest your money in your living space. Take that money and put in your home.
Invest in your home. All right. Thank you so much, Cherry, for joining us. We really appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure,
And
Patty.
for more information on the Center for the Healing of Racism, you can call 713-520-8226 or visit their website, centerhealingracism.org. Or you can call the National Resource Center for the Healing of Racism at 1-800-421-4142 or visit their website at NRCHR. Let me repeat that, NRCHR.org. Please remember to visit HoustonPBS.org/LivingSmart for a complete resource list, and feel free to share your own tips on healing racism. We'll post some of your emails on our website. Let us know what you think. Call us at 713-743-8513 or email livingsmart@HoustonPBS.org. I'm Patricia Gras. That's our show for today. We hope you've enjoyed it. In our next episode, we'll learn how to save money on funeral costs with consultant Ken Lambert. Thank you for watching. Remember to live smart and have a great week.